Hey everybody, my name's Randall Stevens. I'll make sure you guys, Clay, you're seeing my screen, right? For some reason, I can't tell that it's being broadcast. But anyway, welcome everybody. We're going to spend a little bit of time this afternoon talking about a new development that we have around AutoCAD and Civil 3D. So I'm going to show you the progress to date, talk a little bit about why we're doing this, and in this with timing of when to expect this in production. And then we'll should have plenty of time to open this up for comments or questions at the end. I'm joined by a couple of colleagues, two or three it looks like have joined now. They'll help me monitor questions. Feel free to type them in as we go. I'll periodically try to take a breath, and Clay can either help me see if there's any questions that we want to answer before the end, but we'll get rolling. As I said, my name's Randall Stevens. I'm the founder of AVAIL, and still involved with heavily in the product development with the product development team and the engineering team. So usually this stuff kind of starts with me pushing. We need to be going in this direction, that direction, and so I'm going to give you a little bit. We've got kind of two groups of people on this call: existing AVAIL customers who are interested in this new development, and then there are plenty of people on here that are new to AVAIL or aren't currently using AVAIL. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here on the front end, give you just a quick overview of what AVAIL is. There's plenty of other learning material. It's a platform that's full of features, so there's plenty to dig into outside of this webinar if you're new to AVAIL, but I'm going to kind of touch on the highlights in the context of AutoCAD and Civil 3D. One of the features that we're introducing is what we call Harvest. A lot of you that are current customers are using Harvest for Revit, which I'm not going to spend time on except just referencing the context of what we did there. And what we're doing is introducing the same concept basically on the AutoCAD and Civil 3D side around block management. So that's what I'm going to demo for you today. So I'll show you this both running in AutoCAD and Civil 3D. There is another feature that's specific for Civil 3D that I will show you that we've been working on there. Okay, so just the backdrop for those of you that are new to AVAIL. We view kind of our view of the world and what we're trying to do with the platform is to solve, what we've for the last 8 years as we've been working on this project, viewed as one of the missing and maybe more complicated things that goes on in the industry, which is how do we manage all this information that we're producing every day and need to get back to every day. And it's a complicated problem, and I'm not going to claim that we've solved all of those, but that's been our mission and our journey. So ultimately, most of our customers are currently using AVAIL to manage what we would call centralized libraries. You can think about AVAIL as kind of a command and control system. So the ability to centralize resources or assets that you want everybody to have access to. Ultimately, AVAIL is a really good search engine, so it's making those resources available and then providing really easy ways to either browse and or search for that content inside of firms. And ultimately, then for the end users, this is important, the search part of it especially, and the organizational tools that you can use to organize and distribute this information. That work gets leveraged by the end users in helping them put their hands on what is becoming a very expansive amount of information. We're just swimming in it. We're producing it all the time. More and more info gets harder and harder to find. And I'll just add to that it's not just the volume of content, it's where the content is being stored. That's getting more complex because you've got information in different systems. It used to just be, where is it on my network? Now, is it on my network, or is it in another cloud-hosted network, or is it an ACC, or it could be in any number of different kinds of places. So one of the things that AVAIL does is basically takes that out of the equation, not because we necessarily take possession of the content, but because we support that content living in multiple resting locations and then ultimately can still be consumed through a common interface and search interface. And then ultimately, because a lot of these resources are being used in by these production teams, the ultimate goal is, can we not only make those teams more efficient and productive, but in finding what they need, but it also overcomes these problems of what happens when they don't find what they need because they didn't know where it was or it was difficult to search. That's when you get into real trouble because now people are spending time reproducing work that they maybe didn't need to reproduce and maybe is probably not billable. And then ultimately, are they reproducing something that now hasn't been through a QA, QC process? Are we introducing new possibility of errors, right? To increase the risk every time you do that in your production documentation phase of the work that you're working on. So that's kind of why we're on the view in this industry. As I said, we launched this product in 2017, and we've been really lucky. We've been heavily used in the architecture industry, but more and more engineering firms have been adopting AVAIL, and thus investment in other core pieces of software in that technology stack that we're seeing across both architecture and engineering practices. A lot of multidisciplinary firms, so it's like, yes, everybody's been heavy in Revit, but uh, don't forget that there's still a lot of AutoCAD and a lot of Civil 3D that's going on in everybody's workflows or in a lot of workflows. So as you can see up on the screen, we've got a lot of great clients who've supported and been using AVAIL over these last few years. Just a couple of quick screenshots. I'm going to be demoing, so I'll pull up the interface for those of you that are new to AVAIL. But every year we do at the end of the year, we've been doing what we call show your cards. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot of what we call the AVAIL desktop. AVAIL is completely customizable to each of our firm's needs. So they're able to organize and present the information that's comfortable in the way that they want that presented to their constituents within their firm. So every year we've been doing this the last 2 or 3 years. At the end of the year, we do what we call show your cards, which is basically show us how you've organized and designed your interfaces. And these are just a couple of, ways that we've seen customers, customizing the interface of the application to meet their specific needs. Also, for those of you that are new to AVAIL, we have a really big concentration on visuals. So it's largely managing technical content, and we know that seeing it is as important as being able to know what the name of something is to be able to validate it. So as I'll show you in these interfaces and the workflows and the tools that we build, heavy concentration on being able to produce high quality visuals so that the people, again, at their desks that are looking for this stuff can find it, validate that that's what they want before they commit to bringing these technical assets into the applications that they're using at their desk to do their work. So it's an important piece of it. And then last year, in one of our major release cycles, we introduced a concept of related content. So what we're starting to see now, I'm kind of showing you an example here on the screen. I can have an asset, in this case, it was a Revit family, but associated, right, connected to that, related to it are sheets. There might be external URLs to manufacturer websites. There can be other information that wants to come along with it. So the way that we think about this is that, yes, you may have centralized resources, but as soon as somebody touches one of those resources, there's a really good chance that there's other information that's loosely connected to it or related to it. And what you'd really like to do is have those connections so that I think it was like you begin pulling that piece of thread, here's that file that I need, but what else wants to go with it, and can I pull that information through AVAIL to that user so they don't have to go off looking for every individual piece of content. So we introduced that feature, as I'll show you today, with the AutoCAD and Civil 3D implementation. All of these core features are available to any and all content that we're talking about. So these are core to the platform of AVAIL. Here's an example where I have a sheet, and we can show the individual drafting views then are available. And our latest Harvest for Revit that we recently introduced supports automating the connection of all this, like drafting views to the sheets and schedules to the sheets and things like that. So more and more automation in the publishing flow and publishing process. And then, as I said, heavy focus on visuals. This is actually something I'll show you here live. These are actually AutoCAD DWG based details, and I'm showing you that same panel, right, is able to show you high resolution previews of that. All right, so I've been throwing around some words for those of you that are new. AVAIL is the platform. There's usually kind of two pieces of software you can think of it as. There's a desktop application, which I'm going to launch here in a minute and show you how that looks and acts. And then there's plugins that we make inside of specific applications. Primarily, it's been in Revit to date, but we put these specialized plugins when we need them. In general, you can use the AVAIL desktop to put any and all information and content. As long as it's digital, you can index it in there. And as long as the application knows what to do with the file that you've indexed into AVAIL, you can just drag and drop it on it. So I usually like to demonstrate SketchUp. SketchUp knows what to do with an SKP file, its own file format. So I don't need a plugin for SketchUp for AVAIL to work. I can just organize all my content in AVAIL, use all the tools for organizing that, make it all searchable. When I find what I need, I just drag and drop it over onto SketchUp, and SketchUp handles the rest without me having to write a specialized plugin. With Revit, Revit's a special beast. It's got its own quirks and crazy stuff about content that we've had to. So we've written plugins specific for that. What I'm going to show you today is that we're now reintroducing. I say that because we at one time had some plugins for AutoCAD and Civil 3D that we kind of retired. We're reviving that, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you today, as well as introducing this concept of harvesting. So what is harvest? Harvest is this idea that you want to have or often have what we would call a container library or a container file. Some people call them warehouse files in Revit land. But the basic idea is you've got a project file or a file that's got a lot of assets that are stored inside of that file instead of as individual files themselves. So in Revit, usually families in Revit, if you're familiar with that, live on their own because they can be stored as these .rfa files, but there's a lot of content that has to be in a project file in Revit. So everything that's basically not a family. Drafting views, sheets, schedules, legends, any of those kinds of assets, if you want to treat them like that, are ultimately stored in an RVT file. So a lot of our customers who are working in Revit manage libraries then of those kinds of assets inside of one big RVT file or multiple RVT files with lots of drafting views on it. I've got customers where I've seen hundreds and sometimes thousands of drafting views all in one basically project file that's used as kind of the master file. So what Harvest does is we recognize the value of managing that way and keeping information up to date in that central project. So it is actually a pretty simple, I'm not sure that I could come up with a simpler way for somebody to actually manage those kinds of resources and assets. But I will claim it's an absolutely terrible way for people to try to consume from that, to get that information out. You're swimming in a file format that wasn't meant to act in the way you're kind of treating it. Search is usually bad in those interfaces for being able to get to it. So what Harvest was for us was this recognition of that and saying, look, you're going to maintain and manage this stuff in this one centralized container library, but you'd really like to, in AVAIL, see every one of those assets, resources, as an individual resource that can be tagged, can be searched, can be seen, and then can be consumed by an end user to bring it into their project without having to go through and open up a big container warehouse or library or template file, whatever you want to call that, because those just tend to be bad consumption. And I'll show you what on the AutoCAD and Civil 3D what I mean by that. So ultimately, this harvest tool, when we first were introducing some of this, I had a webinar where I was like, here's how you have your cake and eat it too. You can keep your container libraries, manage it there, but run this harvest process to be able to get assets in a form that's much easier for people to consume. So Harvest lets you publish those assets into AVAIL, and they'll show up. It's all an automated process that will do that. And ultimately, you are setting up the situation for the end users to be able to see those, search them, browse them, and easily consume those resources quickly and easily. I like to say that this is a very leveraged situation, especially the bigger the firm. You centralize those assets and resources, You want to get them out in front of people and make it available to them, make it easy for them to search, find, and leverage. And now you've got a leveraged situation where you're getting payoff every time that somebody comes and draws from that central resource that you've put in a big investment in. We hear that a lot. Teams will spend lots of times trying to get stuff organized and get content ready, and then they fight a battle of getting people to actually use it. So a lot of what Avail is about is leveraging to try to get an interface that they want to use that makes that stuff searchable and easy to get to, and ultimately get the ultimate value out of your investment. So just a brief history of this harvest. We have been doing this concept for a while. We actually introduced the first harvest in the first year that Avail was available back in 2017. It was our Harvest 1.0 release. We started out with families and drafting views, but very quickly added support for sheets and system families and groups and schedules, legends. We did another revamp in 2021 time cycle. It was kind of our Harvest 2.0 release. We updated that. We added support for some new items, view templates in Revit, materials support, and we moved to what we call element level containers. So basically the harvest process will write out little consumption files. So in the case of a Revit drafting view, it's just an RVT file that just has that resource in it, and it makes it really quick and easy to consume in the Revit workflow. I'm going to show you that on the AutoCAD and Civil 3D side, same concept. Template files or DWGs where you're managing a lot of things, if they're in blocks, we can use Harvest to write those out. Harvest will do all the work of getting that out into individual blocks behind the scenes for consumption. And it just makes stuff easy and fast to consume. And then earlier this year, we revamped on the Revit side, Harvest 3.0. Part of our roadmap this year was, though, to add into our Harvest capability to do the same for AutoCAD and Civil 3D, which is what we're going to talk about today. And as we talk to customers about this, we often uncover other challenges or problems that they're having in those kinds of workflows. So I'm going to show you something, I think it's relatively simple, I'll call it, but hopefully you'll find that it helps to solve some problems, and that's around getting pipe catalogs configured right inside. So with that, I'm going to take a swig of water and I'll pop up the interface and do a demo unless there's a question I can answer, Clay. All right, hearing nothing from Clay.
Yeah, nothing posted yet.
All right. So I'm going to kind of start backwards. For those of you that are new to Avail, this is what we call the Avail desktop application. So it's an application that gets installed on your computer, and you can think of it as hopefully replacing, for a lot of your search of content, getting rid of Windows File Explorer. Just a much better interface for organizing, seeing, searching, finding that information that you're looking for. And this is my demo account, so I've got lots of different, we call these channels. Channels can be anything you want. They're basically an empty bucket. You decide what's in that bucket that makes sense. But you can also then group. These are called channel groups. I can actually take those channels and put them into logical groupings, which makes it easy. It's not just overwhelming to see them all at once. So you can see here, I've got a new CAD blocks where I've broken out channels that I've got data in. So I'm just going to show you really quick kind of the value. I'll just say as I demo this, and I know I've got a couple of customers on this call who were gracious enough to share real world files with us so that we could test on it. It's one of the hardest things for us to do because we don't have real projects that we do in-house. So we're always begging and borrowing from customers to, hey, can you loan me some assets so that we can actually test this on real world stuff? I did just in the last few days, I was just hunting, pecking around the web for block libraries, and I found I'm going to use this one and I'll show you what the processing for that looked like. But this is a library of CAD, of signs, DWG blocks of signage for, I'm sure civil engineers, anybody doing road construction. I remember when we first launched Avail a few years ago, I was in a engineering firm's office, and one of the guys was looking at what we were doing. He's like, man, this would be great for this kind of content. And he was complaining about how the palettes inside of AutoCAD and Civil 3D were, really tiny, terrible ways to view all of this stuff. And ultimately, if you have lots of them, could be thousands. I think I've got over 1,100 in this channel just from this one little block library. It can, be cumbersome inside of those interfaces in AutoCAD to use and find what you're looking for. So, but I'll start with this because, this is ultimately what you want to try to overcome is how can I search through this without having to open up? I'll show you what this looked like in AutoCAD, right? You could make that template file just available to people and they'd have to open it up and try to find one of these things. But you can see that I've tagged some of this. One of the nice things about Avail is once you begin tagging your information, these interfaces become really nice to be able to, drill down or filter down to exactly the information you want. And then you can literally just drag this over. This is just a DWG file. If I right click and say open the location, you're going to see over on the network, there's a little DWG that was harvested out of that container library, little 69 kilobyte DWG file with that piece of information into it. So it allows me to just drag and drop this over into the interface. I'm going to show you we've put browsers back in the AutoCAD and Civil 3D interface and I'll just hint, we have a future for that back into the Revit workflow that we're thinking through right now. But anyway, this is the value. The other thing that I'll say about Harvest 3.0, it's already out in Revit and will be integrated into this workflow around AutoCAD and Civil 3D is for drafting views and details, and even this content, we're doing full text OCR search on this stuff automatically behind the scenes. So if I take one of these signs that got harvested and open up this information panel and go to the tags and data, you can see that we actually pulled the text off of that and that becomes searchable. So if I knew I was looking for, let's find a word that's not like the word vehicle is in this sign down here. So I'm just going to type in vehicle. Oh, if I could spell vehicle. And right, so I found that I didn't have to manually tag anything. And we're actually going to be implementing we're using some AI techniques on the back end to begin to automate some of this. So we've been testing the last few days, running stuff like this, even symbol libraries, and trying to auto tag and getting just really great results. So I'm hopeful that maybe not day one that this gets released, but soon after we're going to have auto tagging of all this stuff to make it very searchable. So I'm just going to flip through a couple of other channels and just show you. Here's some CAD, block library of some trees and plants and foliage. What most of you are probably interested in, though, is more like where are all my details? So here you can see all of these files. Again, if I open up this right-hand preview panel, I will get a high-res preview of that file that I can see. So again, this is back to the workflow being search for it, and then can I validate, right, by looking at this before I've committed to bringing it into my application. But just to show you, like this one has, let's try to do a search for pellet. You can see that in one of the callouts here. So in this channel, if I were searching for pellet, I should get a hit on at least one of those, right? So this is, again, full text search across all these details. This is a byproduct of our harvest process. When you are running harvest on these assets, we're automatically doing the OCR. Uh, we keep using the word OCR. It's a new form of OCR because we're using these new AI techniques to do it, which has a bunch of benefits. One of the main benefits of that, just for those of you that are maybe more technically minded, is OCR would typically read uh, left to right, top to bottom, as it would scan across an asset to be able to do OCR, like you can imagine on a page of text, uh, left to right, top to bottom. On things like details like this, you can imagine that doesn't work so well. There's actually clustering or groups of information. So the AI techniques that we're using actually keep those clusters. If I open up this information panel, what you'll see is there's paragraphs of text that are lumped together. So even if there was line breaks, we are using these techniques to keep it, which just improves search in the way that works. So that's the basics of the Avail desktop and what it means to get this kind of information in there and use it. What I'm going to do is move over to AutoCAD to start, and let me show you. So this is the sample of that sign block library that I found. So I would assume this is the way a lot of people, deliver and or manage templates. You're either going to go in there, save these out as blocks. Obviously, there is a block manager that's in AutoCAD itself. So if I were to open up the blocks palette, right? So now I've got this file, and you can use these internal browsers to see that stuff and try to search and filter through it. So I'll let that populate. What I'm going to show you though is that now, unless I have, for some reason, my AutoCAD and Civil 3D have been running sluggishly. So give me a second. I think I just hit 1100. So it took that long, right, to index those and find them there. I'm going to show you though, I've loaded the new AVAIL add-in. So I'm going to go close. Hopefully you're going to quit using these old, deprecated, terrible internal palettes that you've been used to in AutoCAD and Civil 3D. I've joked, I don't know that they ever go away, but we basically have implemented this plugin, the AVAIL browser now, as a palette. So this is a fully dockable asset. It's everything that you're used to. You can pin it, open it back up. What you're seeing here are channels. I'll show you the relationship between the desktop and what we're seeing here. But I've basically told the platform for AutoCAD and Civil 3D, I want you to only show these channels, which are relevant to AutoCAD and Civil 3D. So I'll show you how that works as part of the platform here in a second. So here's those same channels. If I went to a new drawing, right, and I was in my signage and block library, I can just double click. I can do that same search. Maybe I'm looking for, let's look for park. So pay to park, here's a sign, and it's literally just drag and drop it over right into my drawing. Sorry. So same flow, same input flow that you're used to doing. You can either browse these channels. I can actually search across all of them. So if I looked for something like bike, I actually have now both signage, but I also had entourage and an entourage channel that was showing up. Again, I can just drag and drop now and place that asset. That might be huge. There it is. So it's as easy as that to search, find, and place these kinds of assets in your project. If that were sorry, that's entourage. If I were looking at those civil detail blocks, again, all searchable, text searchable. There was one that had the word straw in it. So I'm looking for that detail. There it is. I can drag it over, bring it into my CAD, place it. So I'll preempt and say a couple of things that maybe I can get some feedback or questions at the end, but we haven't implemented it yet, but we're probably going to implement the ability to pre-tag things that you want to automatically explode on placement. So when you bring a block in, if it's something you're going to edit, we have the potential to drive that programmatically. So if we know that there's certain assets that you want exploded when they come in on placement, it can automatically explode them. So we're investigating that, talking with customers about what that capability might look like. Anyway, that's that on that front. So basic capability, if I were harvesting, let me go back to this and just show you this before I jump over to Civil 3D. Here's the block library that I opened up. You'll notice in this tab over here on the left-hand side, there's a harvest tab. The harvesting is only available to people who you've given that privilege or right to. So all of your end users wouldn't necessarily get this capability. It's usually in the AVAIL ecosystem reserved to what we call publishers or people that you want to build and maintain the libraries. So this would not show up for your average user. For those of you that are already using this, our latest version in Revit, you'll notice a lot of the same dialogue of look and feel. So you do the same thing. You configure the settings of which channel you want to drive the data into, where on your network that you want to store. So for those of you that are new to AutoCAD or new to AVAIL, We let you, if you at your choosing, you can either use our cloud storage or you can actually write the data back onto your own network. So for security reasons, when you want to keep all of your information inside your own firewall, Avail supports that and being able to point back to a centralized place. That can, you know, uh, people, I think, I don't want to say they get confused, but it's worth a reminder that there is also your cloud. So if you're on Ignite or you're using OneDrive or you're using ACC, those are cloud first storage that are yours, not Avail's cloud storage that we can write data to. So it can be your own cloud storage solution or an on-prem network, either one. So I just sense that uh, people get a little bit confused about that, about what we mean by that. But what you're going to see here is I can basically either queue these up one at a time, or what I did, there was 1,118 of these. I'll tell you on my machine that I'm running on here, this took about an hour for me to harvest those out. And once it's done, it's done. For normal, right? If you're harvesting a dozen things out of there, it's just going to take a couple of minutes to be able to get those assets out. But that's all there is to the harvest process. So hopefully, if you've got a bunch of block libraries that you've already been, or template files and block libraries like this that you've been maintaining, this tool should make it really easy for you to get that stuff out into Avail into a form that's much easier for everybody to consume. This button will always just launch the desktop back up. But let me move over to Civil 3D and show you. So same interface there. Uh, Again, if I wanted to bring, signage block libraries in, or, let's right turn. So drag and drop to be able to bring assets in, and all completely searchable. Harvest, same. If you've got privileges, you can open up a drawing and harvest from it. And here's the difference, though, or a feature that we've added to the Civil 3D version of this plugin that's unique to Civil 3D. So for those of you on the call, and this is somewhat new to us. We've been studying it for about a year, but try to get the language right and try to understand what the problem was. In Civil 3D, if you're managing your pipe network catalogs, pressure network catalogs, we've started with the pipe network catalogs. I'll explain here in a second why, but we have sites set on also doing the same thing for the pressure network catalogs. But if you are used to this, you click that, and you can only have one catalog loaded at a time. And you have to pop up this interface and switch between them if you're going to switch which catalog you want to use. And you can see these little pull downs. So even though there's only one choice, I'd have to choose those. You can see here on the network that there's a network location where these files live. And what we were told by some customers was that these sometimes get unset. They're either deploying software, and for whatever reason, the configs get unset. People lose their settings for where this stuff is. Maybe not every day, but once a year. But you multiply that out across the entire firm, and then it's a support ticket for where is this file? A lot of these kinds of situations I describe as intermittent use. Anything that you do intermittently, once every 6 months, you basically are having to relearn it every time you go back to do it. So this is one of those examples. If this is always set every day and you're just used to using it, everything's fine and hunky-dory. As soon as that's unset, now you're lost. Where is that file? Where is it on the network? That's not something that I think about, and now I've got to go look for help. I've got to figure out how to reset it. So what we did is we did some R&D to prove, is it possible to set those? And what we found was, one, the Civil 3D AutoCAD APIs do not expose that in their APIs to be able to set that. But we have a wonder engineer on our team named Donovan. These are the perfect problems that Donovan, I throw at him, and he comes back in a day and goes, "Yep, not in the API, but I figured out a way to do it." So that's the nice thing about having people like Donovan on our team. This one is deep and ugly in that the settings are like in the registry of window. There's just all kinds of complicated stuff that Civil 3D has done to get that stuff set. So what we've done now is actually productized publishing individual settings for these catalogs, having those now show up in this interface. And so this is part of, you can centrally distribute these to everybody's desk with this plugin on. And now switching catalogs is literally one click. We can't get rid of that little pop-up happening, but we basically loaded it and closed it for you. So me switching catalogs is as easy as opening up this new catalog tab, seeing which one I want to do, and hitting the load button. So back to, does this happen? Is this a problem every day for people? Probably not. But when you start to think about at scale, how do we manage where these things are, make sure that everybody's got their settings right? So this was, I think, a nice feature that we could get added in here that again helps teams that are trying to manage across a large organization and keep all this, we kind of are treating this like it's content almost. So, and I'll show you actually in Avail, if I open up the desktop. Let's go back here. So I actually have those pipe catalogs being published in a channel, and I could tag these. This looks like it's broken just because it's a special kind of content. It's not actually a file that sits on your network, but I can tag these, I can organize them. So from a central management standpoint, if you've got a bunch of these that you're trying to manage or organize, I think it's also just interesting that we can publish those. I'll just show you if I go back to the catalogs tab. There's actually a creation dialog. So you can think about, instead of those individual pull downs, just basically publishing one setting and turning that into something that's a logical grouping of setting, publishing that, and now you may have a dozen of these or however many you want to flip through, but now it's really easy for people to just flip between the ones that they want. Um, there's something, yeah, there it comes. But if I wanted to create a new one, we basically have a little dialogue that looks similar to what that little pop-up dialogue was, which is, where's the catalog folder where this lives on your network? Which pipe catalog do you want to set to that? And then what do you want to name this? So how it shows up in Avail, and then which channel do you want to hold this in Avail? So I'll just show you if I open up one of these, click the edit. So here it is already set. I've said, here's where that catalog sits. Here were the choices. Let me go open one that's got more in it. I think this one does, telecom. So now you can, chose the wrong one. There we go. So you can see once you're pointing at a directory that's got these complex, you can choose which one. So in this situation, if I wanted to publish each of these, I could turn these into 4 different assets basically that are searchable, findable, and just one click away for your end users. So I think it's just a form of reducing complexity and making that kind of stuff easier for people to get loaded. Just one other quick thing, and then we'll open this up to questions. I'm going to go back to AutoCAD and just give you one other example to get this point across. So when you are publishing information in Avail, these assets and resources, you are centrally publishing that, and basically you're not pushing out the data itself, but you're pushing out to this application layer what's available for people to search for. You didn't have to install any new software. You didn't have to do anything on the content side to keep that continuously updated back to that single source of truth. So I'm going to give you an example. So here I'm going to go back to Avail Desktop. We introduced a feature a couple of years ago called application mappings. It's been largely centered around Revit, but now this should make a lot of sense now that we're reintroducing this AutoCAD. So on the left here, you can see I've got an AutoCAD application. Over here on my right are those channel groups that are across the top. And what I'm doing in the middle part here is assigning which of these channel groups makes sense for this application. So it basically is filtering out and letting your search from that application focus on that. And in this example of this new browser interface, which channels make sense to display in that application instead of showing all of it. You're having to wade through all of them like you would in the desktop. So here you can see I've added CAD blocks, but if I wanted to add like marketing assets available, it's one click. And if I go back to this application, and we're going to put a little refresh button up here, which exists in our Revit add-in, but we haven't added it here yet. But if I go back, what you're going to see is I now have marketing assets available right inside of here. And as long as, excuse me, as long as your host application knows what to do with it, like here's an image file coming in, I can bring that image right into there. Or if I was doing a search for, I'm looking for our logos that I want to add to a sheet or to put on somewhere. Again, if the host application knows what to do with like a PNG file, I can just drag and drop that asset. Give it placement mode here. Right? And bring that asset in. So I wanted to demonstrate that because it shows you the power. Somebody centrally decided that that was a new resource that wanted to be available to everybody. And nobody had to go do anything except just open the interface back up and it's there. So this whole idea of kind of centralized publishing, which I think, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're trying to manage these block libraries, I don't know that there's a real easy way to keep that stuff updated centrally and make sure it's on without installing software or doing periodic updates of software updates and how to push that stuff out around the network. So anyway, I'll be quiet for a few minutes and see if we've got any questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions that came through. The first of which from Rebecca said that and looks great. What version years of AutoCAD will the plugin work for?
Oh, good question. I'll tell you what we've been targeting on the Revit side. I think where are we supporting now, Clay? Revit 2021. In general, we're
Yes.
going to support whatever Autodesk is supporting officially. Doesn't mean that we can't go back further than that. I don't know which version, but I would guess that we're going to go back at least to 21 on this and be able to have the plugins available.
Great. Another question from Don. Do you have control over what layer the content is placed on or its default orientation? Or is it strictly just a straight insert?
Yeah, a good question. We're still doing some investigation on that. What's interesting about the insertion layer is if you are opening up an AutoCAD DWG, selecting something and doing a Control C, and then going to your other drawing and doing a Control V, cut and paste. The way that data transfers in AutoCAD and Civil 3D using that, I just lost the word, the buffer, that's basically your cut and paste buffer, acts differently than using the APIs for insertion. So we're still not quite sure. I think a lot of times the insertion layer is different for when you can do a cut and paste action as opposed to using the dragging something in. So I don't have a definitive answer for you on that. As far as the rotation, same as like this idea of exploding. If that's something that we think is important to add as metadata to content so that there was a default scale, default rotation, versus place it and let people, set that in the way that I did, or do you want that to be controlled and on placement? It's going to be whatever you've predefined. We can do both. So that's part of the kind of data collection that we're still, talking to people about the way they would need or want that to work. But we should be able to support that.
Great. Another question from Tyler, something that we had touched on, or you had mentioned, Randall. Does the pipe catalog tool work for pressure network pipe catalogs as well?
Yeah, we haven't worked on the support for the pressure networks. Pressure networks are different than the pipe networks in that their data is stored in a SQL file, a SQLite file. So the work that we did to figure out the pipe network, we were like, oh, we just apply this to that one. Well, that wasn't quite that easy. The data's in a SQL file. We think we're going to be able to, that's why I say we think we're going to be able to do it. We just haven't turned our attention to it yet. We're going to try to get this version out with the pipe networks in August. I'll come back to the timeline. But we'll go to work on that. And then, part of our work process is to get out kind of an MVP early version that does, has value to people, and then start to hear, I wish it did this. Without this, I can't do this kind of work, or I'm doing a bunch of this and it's taking a bunch of time. Is there a way to automate that? That's then the feedback loop that we get into to start the roadmap and further improvement of these tools.
Max has a question. Is there any future for AVAIL storing Civil 3D styles and parts lists?
Maybe. I think so. Yeah, I'd want to have, it'd be new to, we just need to dig in and understand it. And then we can, I think any of this kind of content, and in fact, my mind is turned towards once we started thinking about how to solve this pipe catalog, because I've got some other customers that have said, can you help distribute fonts, right? To make sure we've got the right fonts in place. So there's a lot of what we're doing with AVAIL. I've started talking about, I use the acronym SRO, surface information, which is the prime value prop of what AVAIL does. The R is for routing the information or content to the right place. Because a lot of times these applications want files or data to be in a very specific location in order to work. So you can think about like a material that you might have in Revit. That material, if it's got textures, that's an external file that needs to be in a certain location in order for Revit to know to see it, to render. So that's what we would refer to as routing. So more and more, we're thinking about how not only are you centralizing these resources, but can we route that data and put it where it needs to be on each user's machine in order for this stuff to work? So fonts, I'm not as familiar with what the styles, how those work, but it sounds like it might fall into those kind of categories. Like, are there files? Where can they get distributed? So there's either two things that can happen. There's either an API access to it through the host application that we can programmatically do things, or if we know that there are files or config files that need to live in certain places, can we route and automate the creation and putting of that information in the right place in order for this stuff to work? So there's new stuff that we're also working on where when you do download or pull information, it can be more than one, just one file. There may be associated files, kind of like I was showing with related content. Similar concept. If there's things that need to go with it, can we deliver that and put that data where it needs to go in order for things to just work, right? Which is the ultimate goal. It should just work. It should be really easy and should just work. Instead, I think people are always fighting stuff being in the wrong place or it's missing, and just there's a lot of complexity that we're trying to remove. Next.
Cool. Yeah, we got a few more questions. Don has another question. Any plans to include corridor assemblies to be brought into Civil 3D, or is it just a simple create a block of it and place it in AVAIL? Any testing done on this?
We haven't. We've been asked to start to look at assemblies. Some of it's just purely ignorance on our part of kind of understanding how they work. So, if you want to set up a call, whoever asked that question, if you want to set up a separate call, a lot of times it's, can you just show me what that looks like and how it works in your environment? And then it gets us oriented in the right way and we can go work on it and add it. So in general, we view this as just a starting point. We are making a big investment in the AutoCAD Civil 3D side. So we'll want to understand what other resources and what's bad about the way they're currently managed or could be improved if you were doing this with AVAIL, and then we'll try to add support for that.
Great. We got another question around the harvest capabilities. When the files get harvested, what file type is getting saved out to those picked locations?
In this case, they're DWGs. I'd have to look at which version or how that setting is done. You can save out different versions of a DWG. I'll have to go look at how if whether we're in control of that or if it's whatever's by default from the app that you're running Harvest on. It may just have a default setting. Um, but yeah, it's a DWG file.
Oh, a
And,
couple more.
and it's
Oh,
maintaining it as a block. So if it was a block, that block is getting written out into a separate DWG file and comes back in as a block. And that's why then the choice of like, would you want this to maybe explode on its way in? Because we can do that with our plugin. If it was if it was tagged, I'll just use that word in AVAIL as explode on insertion, we could basically program our plugin to when that asset's being brought through with AVAIL installed to not after you've placed it automatically explode that or scale it or rotate it. Any of those kind of parameters that you're used to.
Max has another question. They're all really kind of around Avail. Is the Avail interface changed by certain users for the whole company, or does each user have the ability to customize their interface?
Good question. So there's a little bit of both. There's customization by the end user. They can hide things that they don't want to see that have been shared with them. In general, though, on the centralized standpoint, every channel you decide who in the firm should see it. So not everybody sees everything. That's the starting point. If there's specific channels of information and you only want certain people to see it, then you just share it with certain people. If you want everybody to see it, there's a mechanism to say it's basically public inside the firm. Everybody sees it. So from that standpoint, the end user doesn't see everything, and different users will see different information that's appropriate for them. Once they've been granted access to it, they have some controls in their own interface about whether they want to hide those, get them out of the way. At least we do in the desktop. We'll see how this new implementation inside these browsers, inside the app matures on that front. But the ability to hide things, um, and there's another feature that got introduced that's now part of the desktop called palettes. I would imagine that we will quickly add palette support to this AutoCAD and Civil 3D. Palettes are user generated. You can think of them as little buckets that they run around the library and grab things in, and then they can actually share those palettes with other team members. So it's a way of grabbing assets that make sense at a project level, putting those into, we call them palettes. We'll see how confusing this gets from an AutoCAD palette to an AVAIL palette, but and then they can decide to share those with colleagues like that they're working with on the team. So there's kind of from both directions ways that this gets shaped and customized to what you want to see.
Cool. One last question. I think this is around kind of the pipe catalogs and storing these things on their network. So they say, as you mentioned, we can host catalogs inside our firewall for our organization network. Is this in this case, do the other catalogs with the add-in do the same, have the same firewall network organization?
Ask it again.
It says, as you mentioned, we could host catalog inside our firewall for our
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
In this case, does the other catalogs offered with the software, is it available for that as well? Is it the same structure for their network when I guess when they're using those pipe catalogs, um, is that from their same network infrastructure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wherever you've got those pipe catalogs sitting on your network today, none of that has to change. All we did was try to solve the problem of does the end user know where that is on your network? And if I need to switch them, how hard is it for me to open up that existing dialog, browse on the network to where that thing is and set that? So we've taken the settings part of it and said, have somebody centrally configure those, publish it in Avail, and we'll make it as easy as instead of having to go through and browse on the network, just clicking a button to load it. So the data, we didn't change anything about where those are stored on your own network. The other nice thing about doing this is if in the future you ever did want to move those on your network, you've made it much easier for everybody to have the right new connections because you just republish the updates for where those things exist And for your end users, it's no different. They're just clicking that button and loading, and it's setting, pointing to the right place. So I think that hopefully answered that question. Any others?
No, that was the last one.
All right. You all feel free to put in the last ones, but I'm going to give you a couple of ending notes on this. So just kind of back to what we think and why we usually don't want to go work on something unless we think that there's value. Obviously, it takes time and a lot of investment to get this stuff done. But the value prop, hopefully for AutoCAD Civil 3D teams is, back to that single source of truth, and you've always got the latest version. It's always current. And then because you're centralizing the management of that, the real value is the distribution. We've done the work to get this stuff organized, to make it available. So you get centralized distribution of that across multiple offices, multiple teams, however you're organized to get that information out to them. And then ultimately the payoff, if the end users, if we're making this easier for them to find what they're looking for, if the thing exists to help make sure they put their hands on it instead of going and wasting time recreating it, going around the internet trying to look or find, rework, re-accessing this. Every time they go and have to do something, instead of using what's already been QA/QC'd, you've introduced the possibility of new errors in the process, just all of those types of things. So we've seen this now over and over on the Revit side with managing detail libraries. I'm going to imagine it's the same thing in the AutoCAD and Civil 3D world. I was showing these like signage templates, but you can imagine your drafting view libraries, your detail libraries, and those types of things that you want to centralize. You just want to make sure people can put their hands on it instead of recreating that stuff and wasting time. So that's the big value prop. Golden question is, okay, Randall, I love what you showed me. Everybody can give a thumbs up if they like what they're seeing, so we get a little bit of feedback here. But we've been working on this the last 60, 90 days in earnest. It would have been out sooner, but there's a really nasty bug that we've been fighting in Revit. Not our bug, Revit's bug. And it put us behind a couple of months in what we originally thought this time cycle was going to be. But we are currently working on this. We're going to complete what we would call these core features, MVP, like in the next couple of weeks is our goal. So can we be ready in the second half of August? The way we normally develop these products is we will release them into what we call preview release, basically code for beta. For our existing customers, you probably already know where the preview releases show up in the portal. You'll be able to get access. We'll send you a note out that says it's available. You'll be able to download this and start testing it on your own. And then I'm sure we'll have follow-up calls to see what all's working or not working or needs to be added. And ultimately, then our goal is usually a month, 4 to 6 weeks, if all goes well. We'll bring that out of preview release and say it's production ready and generally available to everyone. So we would anticipate trying to have this ready to go by Q4. That we've finished all the testing and last minute features. For those of you, just a quick note for those of you that are new to AVAIL, we are 100% focused in the AC industry. So everything we do are around these kinds of apps, this kind of content, thinking about how production teams work and how these tools can make them more important. I'm Randall Stevens, but if you're not a customer and you need to become one because you want to get your hands on this, you need to email Will Rouse, who's actually on this call. His email I've put up here, WROUSE@getavail.com. He's actually a much happier guy than he comes across when he turns his camera on. But Will will be happy to talk to you. We run, for those of you that aren't a customer that would want to test this, we can help get you set up and help you run through a process to understand if this is valuable enough to want to think about bringing AVAIL into your operation. But there's probably a bunch of people on this call who are already AVAIL customers that this is just going to be another value add inside their organization if they've got a lot of AutoCAD and Civil 3D work that goes on. Civil 3D, right? Civil still heavily using these apps. So we're happy to bring these new tools to bear. Any last minute things there, Clay?
No, nothing coming through.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We will send some follow. I'm sure Laura is going to send a follow-up email, probably make the recording available. And then, like I said, if you want to either talk to me if you're a current customer and want to talk about specific features, you can just ping me or through Clay in the support desk. And then if you're not a customer, start talking to Will. He'll help you. And he's not like a annoying sales guy. He's actually a nice sales guy. He'll his job is to help make sure that this makes sense for you or not. So thanks everybody.